The Life of Elizabeth I by Alison Weir. Picture this. It's a freezing November morning in England. Almost 500 years ago, under an ancient oak tree in a quiet park, a young woman sits absorbed in a book. She's just 25, slender, with striking red hair she got from her father, and sharp, intelligent eyes that catch everything. For years, she's lived carefully in the shadows, a chess piece in the deadly games of royalty, her life hanging by a thread more than once. Just months ago, she was locked up, terrified of the executioner's axe. Suddenly, a group of grave-faced men arrive, the most powerful lords in the kingdom. They kneel before her on the damp grass. Her half-sister, Queen Mary, is dead. And now she is Elizabeth, Queen of England. For a moment, she can't speak, overwhelmed by it all. Then, dropping to her knees, she whispers in Latin, words from the Psalms. "This is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes." Can you imagine what that must have felt like, going from prisoner to monarch almost overnight? Inheriting a kingdom on the brink of collapse, broke, torn apart by religion, surrounded by enemies? Most people looking at this young woman in 1558 would have bet she wouldn't even survive, let alone rule successfully. A woman ruling alone? In that era, it seemed unnatural. Impossible. Yet this young woman wouldn't just survive. She'd reign for nearly half a century, giving her name to an entire age and becoming one of the most remarkable rulers England, perhaps the world, has ever known. Hello there, welcome. Today we're diving into the life of this extraordinary figure through the eyes of Alison Weir, a brilliant historian who brings the past to life like few others can. Her book, The Life of Elizabeth I, isn't just dates and battles. It's a deep, personal look into the heart and mind of Elizabeth Tudor, the woman behind the crown, the human being navigating treacherous political waters, complex relationships, and the crushing burden of solitary power. Alison Weir has spent years immersed in the Tudor world, and in this book she paints a vivid portrait of Elizabeth, drawing on letters, eyewitness accounts, and the whispers of the past. Forget this stiff, distant figure you might see in paintings. By the end of our journey today, you'll understand how a young princess, marked by tragedy and danger from birth, forged herself into a ruler of immense skill, courage, and complexity. You'll see the choices she made, the sacrifices, the moments of triumph and vulnerability. You'll understand the story of Elizabeth, not just as a queen, but as a person who shaped history, and whose legacy still echoes today. So, settle in, and let's explore the life of Elizabeth I. To truly understand Elizabeth, you have to understand the world she was born into, and the England she inherited in 1558. It was, frankly, a mess. Her half-sister, Mary Tudor, history remembers her, perhaps unfairly, as Bloody Mary, had just died after 5 miserable years on the throne. Mary, a devout Catholic, had tried desperately to undo the religious changes started by their father, Henry VIII, and continued by their brother, Edward VI. She married Philip II of Spain, Europe's most powerful Catholic king, hoping for heirs to secure her Catholic restoration. But the marriage was deeply unpopular, dragged England into Spain's costly wars, and lost England its last foothold on the continent, the port of Calais. Worse, Mary's fierce conviction led her to burn nearly 300 Protestants at the stake for heresy. By the time she died, heartbroken and childless, England was poorer, weaker, and more divided than ever. Imagine stepping into that. A treasury empty, debts piling up, a country split down the middle by religion, passionate Catholics versus equally passionate Protestants, especially strong in London. Abroad, England was a minor player caught between two giants, Catholic Spain and Catholic France. France was even promoting another claimant to Elizabeth's throne, her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, who many Catholics believed was the true heir because they never accepted Henry VIII's divorce and his marriage to Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn. Spain, under Philip II, was technically an ally, but Philip saw himself as the defender of Catholicism. If Elizabeth returned England to Protestantism, as everyone expected, that alliance, and England's safety, would be in grave danger. And Elizabeth herself? Her claim to the throne was shaky in many eyes. Henry VIII had declared her illegitimate after executing her mother. Though he later put her back in the line of succession, the taint of illegitimacy never fully disappeared. Add to that the fact she was a woman. In the 16th century, the idea of a woman holding supreme power was deeply unsettling to most men. They saw women as weak, emotional, unfit to rule. England's first experience with a queen regnant, Mary, had hardly inspired confidence. Could another woman possibly cope with such immense problems? Many doubted it. But Elizabeth wasn't just any woman. She was forged in the fire of adversity. Think about her childhood. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, executed for treason when Elizabeth was not yet 3 years old. Imagine the confusion, the whispers, the dawning realization of that horror for a young, intelligent child. Then, a revolving door of stepmothers. One of them, Catherine Howard, another relative of her mother's, also met her end on the executioner's block for alleged adultery when Elizabeth was just 8. It's around this time she supposedly told her childhood friend, Robert Dudley, "I will never marry." Can we blame her? Marriage, in her young eyes, must have seemed inextricably linked with danger, disgrace, even death. Yet, despite the instability and emotional scars, she received an extraordinary education. Supervised by her last stepmother, the kind Catherine Parr, and taught by brilliant scholars like Roger Ascham, she blossomed. Ascham marveled at her formidable intelligence, her acute mind, and remarkably good memory. He declared her mind free from all female weakness, possessing a masculine power of application. High praise indeed in that era. She wasn't just book-smart. She mastered Latin, Greek, French, Italian, Spanish, even Welsh. She read history voraciously, loved philosophy, excelled at calligraphy, music, playing the lute and virginals, dancing, riding, and hunting. She was a true Renaissance princess, intellectually equipped to rule. But her teenage years brought new dangers. After her father's death, living with Catherine Parr and her new husband, the dashing but reckless Admiral Thomas Seymour, Elizabeth found herself the object of his alarming attentions. Early morning romps, tickling, inappropriate familiarity that escalated after Catherine Parr became pregnant. Catherine eventually sent Elizabeth away. After Catherine died in childbirth, Seymour was arrested for treason, partly for plotting to marry the young princess without permission. Elizabeth, though likely infatuated with him, kept her composure, famously remarking, "This day died a man of much wit and very little judgment." But the scandal nearly ruined her reputation and put her life in danger again. She learned a harsh lesson. Control your emotions, trust no one completely, and always, always be careful. The greatest test came during her sister Mary's reign. Mary, deeply suspicious of Elizabeth's Protestant leanings, saw her as a threat. When a rebellion broke out against Mary's planned marriage to Philip of Spain, Elizabeth was accused of involvement and thrown into the Tower of London. Imagine the terror, expecting execution daily in the very place her mother had died. She later called it the most traumatic time of her youth, believing her survival was a miracle, divine intervention. She emerged from that ordeal even more cautious, more skilled in the arts of deception and self-preservation, and utterly determined never to relinquish control of her own destiny again. So this was the woman who became queen in 1558, 25 years old. Tall, slender, striking rather than conventionally beautiful, with her father's red hair and her mother's dark eyes and high cheekbones. Beneath the calm, regal exterior she presented to the world, burned a fierce intelligence, an iron will, and a profound understanding of the dangerous world she inhabited. She could be vain, temperamental, even imperious. She possessed a sharp wit that could sometimes turn malicious, but she also had immense courage, deep-seated loyalty to her people, and an unusual tolerance for the age. She had learned to hide her feelings, to avoid committing, to play for time. She knew how to use her femininity as a tool, stressing her weaknesses, while deploying formidable strengths. And she possessed a powerful charisma, an ability to connect with ordinary people that would become the bedrock of her reign. England desperately needed stability, security, and strong leadership. Could this complex, scarred, brilliant young woman provide it? The odds seemed stacked against her. Her very first act as queen, after giving thanks to God, was to begin assembling her government. And her most crucial appointment, made almost immediately, revealed both her shrewd judgment and the pattern of her personal relationships. She needed advisors she could trust implicitly. Her chief choice was Sir William Cecil. He was 38, immensely capable, hard-working, discreet, and a committed Protestant who had cautiously advised her during Mary's reign. Their partnership would become one of the most remarkable in English history, lasting 40 years. Elizabeth called him her spirit, relying on his wisdom and caution, even though he, like most men, initially doubted a woman's fitness to rule. In appointing him Secretary of State, she told him directly, "This judgment I have of you, that you will not be corrupted with any manner of gifts, and that you will be faithful to the state, and that, without respect of my private will, you will give me that counsel which you think best." She knew she needed honest advice, even when it was unwelcome. Cecil, in turn, quickly came to appreciate her unique abilities. But even as she appointed this pillar of stability, Elizabeth made another, far more controversial choice. She named her childhood friend, Lord Robert Dudley, as Master of the Horse. This was a prestigious position, responsible for the royal stables, state processions, and court entertainments. Dudley was handsome, charismatic, skilled in all the courtly arts, and almost exactly Elizabeth's age. They had known each other since she was 8. He had shared lessons with her, offered support during Mary's reign, even selling land to help her. He rushed to her side the moment he heard of her accession. But Dudley was also the son of the Duke of Northumberland, the man who had tried to usurp the throne from both Mary and Elizabeth just 5 years earlier. The taint of treason clung to his name. And perhaps more significantly for the future, Robert Dudley was already married. His wife, Amy Robsart, lived quietly in the country. Yet from the very beginning of the reign, Elizabeth showed Dudley extraordinary favor. They were seen riding together constantly. She seemed to rely on his company, his charm, his ability to make her laugh. He quickly became indispensable, not just socially, but increasingly in matters of state. The court buzzed with gossip. How close were they? Was this just friendship? Or something more? The Spanish ambassador, de Feria, wrote home in April 1559, just 5 months into the reign, reporting rumors that the Queen visited Dudley's chamber day and night, and was only waiting for his ailing wife to die so she could marry him. So the stage was set. A young, determined queen, navigating a treacherous world, leaning on the steady wisdom of Cecil, yet clearly captivated by the charm of the dashing, dangerous Robert Dudley. And overshadowing everything was the question that would dominate the next quarter century. Would the Virgin Queen marry? And if so, who? The coronation in January 1559 was a masterstroke of political theater. Elizabeth understood the power of spectacle. In an age where legitimacy was questioned, she needed to present herself as the undoubted, magnificent Queen of England. The procession through London the day before was a triumph. Dressed in cloth of gold, carried in an open litter, she deliberately engaged with the crowds. She smiled, she waved, she stopped to accept flowers from poor women, she spoke with tender and gentle language to humble folk. One observer wrote, "If ever any person had either the gift or the style to win the hearts of the people, it was this queen." Her spirit seemed to be everywhere. She deliberately combined mildness with majesty, forging a bond with her subjects that would prove unbreakable. The city responded with elaborate pageants reinforcing Protestant hopes and Tudor legitimacy, showing Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn united, with Elizabeth as their triumphant heir. When presented with an English Bible, she kissed it, held it to her heart, and promised to be a diligent reader. The message was clear. The coronation service itself, the last in England conducted mainly in Latin, contained another subtle but significant gesture. When the officiating bishop elevated the host, the consecrated bread and wine, a central moment for Catholics but rejected by Protestants, Elizabeth pointedly withdrew to a curtained chapel, refusing to witness it. Her Protestant subjects took note. The celebrations culminated in a lavish banquet in Westminster Hall, with Elizabeth presiding in regal splendor, solidifying her image as Great Harry's daughter, come to restore England's fortunes. But celebrations couldn't mask the urgent political realities. Barely was she crowned when Parliament presented her with a formal petition. Kneeling before her, the Speaker reminded her that princes are mortal. For the safety of the realm, for the sake of the succession, she must marry, and soon. Imagine this scene. A room full of powerful men, telling this young woman, who had fought so hard for her independence, that her primary duty was to take a husband who could guide her, protect her, and father her heirs. Elizabeth's response became legendary. In a matter most unpleasing, she began, acknowledging their goodwill. She reminded them she had already turned down proposals from most potent princes. Then, holding up her coronation ring, she delivered the words that would define her reign. "I am already bound unto a husband, which is the kingdom of England. And as for children, every one of you, and as many as are Englishmen, are children and kinsmen to me." She hadn't entirely ruled out marriage, she conceded. If God directed her that way, she would choose a husband careful of the realm. But she warned them, it was possible God might wish her to remain single. And as for a successor, she trusted Providence would provide one, perhaps even better than any child born of her own body, for the issue of the best princes many times degenerateth. She concluded with the immortal line, "In the end, this shall be for me sufficient, that a marble stone shall declare that a queen, having reigned such a time, lived and died a virgin." Parliament was startled, alarmed. Surely she couldn't be serious. Most assumed it was maidenly modesty, a negotiating tactic. Cecil himself prayed constantly for, "God send our mistress a husband, and by a son." But was she serious? Alison Weir explores the complex web of reasons behind Elizabeth's stance. There was the political tightrope. Marrying a foreign prince risked alienating her fiercely patriotic subjects, as her sister Mary had discovered. Marrying an English subject, even one she loved, like Dudley, could ignite dangerous factionalism and jealousy among the nobility, perhaps even civil war. Elizabeth hesitated to demean her royal blood by marrying a commoner, but deeper than politics were her personal demons. The traumatic childhood association of marriage with death. The intense desire, after years of constraint, to preserve her hard-won freedom and autonomy. 16th-century wives, even queens, were expected to obey their husbands. Could Elizabeth, with her powerful intellect and pride, ever submit to being subordinate to any man? She doubted it. She confided to envoys her preference for being a beggar woman and single, far rather than a queen and married. She found the celibate life so agreeable, she'd rather die than renounce it. Then there was the physical aspect. Fear of childbirth, a dangerous prospect in that era, claimed the lives of two of her stepmothers and her grandmother. Rumors, fueled by Spanish spies and court gossip, whispered that she might be physically incapable of bearing children. De Feria reported this early on. Later investigations, including one by Cecil himself, querying her doctors and ladies, concluded she was physically capable. Elizabeth herself sometimes hinted at problems, perhaps out of caprice, perhaps for diplomatic reasons. Alison Weir suggests that while physical issues can't be proven, a deep psychological aversion rooted in her traumatic youth, combined with clear-eyed political calculation, likely explains her lifelong resistance. But resisting marriage didn't mean resisting courtship. Quite the opposite. Elizabeth seemed to adore the attention, the flattery, the game itself, and she played it brilliantly. For the next 25 years, the courts of Europe buzzed with speculation about who would win the hand of the Queen of England. First came her former brother-in-law, Philip II of Spain, perhaps the most powerful man in the world. His ambassador, de Feria, proposed on his behalf, expecting Elizabeth to be overwhelmed by the honor. Instead, she stalled, raised objections about religious differences and the awkwardness of marrying her sister's widower, citing her father's great matter. When Philip, with unseemly haste, announced his engagement to a French princess, Elizabeth pretended to be piqued, but was secretly delighted. She had kept Spain friendly without sacrificing her independence. Next came the Habsburg archdukes, Ferdinand and Charles, nephews of Philip. Envoys arrived. Portraits were exchanged. Elizabeth charmed the ambassadors, expressed interest, but insisted she must see any potential husband before deciding. This was highly unconventional. Royals married for politics, often sight unseen. Sending a prince on approval was deemed undignified. She suggested Charles might visit in disguise. The emperor refused. The negotiations dragged on for years, waxing and waning with the political climate, until finally collapsing over the insurmountable issue of religion. Charles wouldn't abandon Catholicism, and Elizabeth wouldn't permit him to practice it publicly in England. There were others, Eric of Sweden, passionate and persistent, who even set sail for England before being driven back by storms. Elizabeth gently turned him down, preferring friendship. Various German dukes made offers, quickly dismissed. Even the King of France, Charles IX, proposed marriage, despite being 14 years younger than Elizabeth. She laughed it off, joking about marrying her son, but kept the negotiations alive for diplomatic leverage. And then there were the Englishmen, the elderly, wealthy Earl of Arundel, whom Elizabeth strung along amusingly. The handsome diplomat Sir William Pickering, briefly a popular favorite, who perhaps took his chances too seriously. But always, lurking in the background, or often right beside her, was Robert Dudley. Their intimacy grew, and so did the scandal. Elizabeth showered him with gifts, lands, titles. In 1564, she finally created him Earl of Leicester. As she invested him, before the watchful eyes of the court and foreign ambassadors, she playfully tickled his neck. What did it mean? Was she mocking the idea of marrying him, or hinting at a deeper intimacy? No one knew for sure. Dudley himself, ambitious and clearly in love, seemed to believe marriage was possible, especially if his wife, Amy, were to die. And then, in September 1560, Amy Dudley did die, found dead, with a broken neck at the foot of a staircase in Cumnor Place, where she was staying. The timing was astonishingly convenient. Immediately, rumors exploded. Murder. Had Dudley arranged it? Had Elizabeth known? Cecil himself confided dark suspicions to the Spanish ambassador just the day before Amy's death, hinting that they were thinking of destroying her. Dudley appeared genuinely distraught, not perhaps from grief, but from fear for his reputation and future. He insisted on a rigorous inquest. Thomas Blunt, his agent sent to investigate, reported Amy had seemed depressed, even desperate, before her death, and had insisted her servants leave the house that day. Suicide? An accident on the shallow stairs? Or murder? Later accounts, like the venomous pamphlet Leicester's Commonwealth, accused Dudley's associate Richard Verney of the crime. Modern historians, including Alison Weir, lean towards a natural cause, possibly advanced breast cancer causing brittle bones, leading to a spontaneous fracture. Whatever the truth, the inquest returned a verdict of accidental death. Elizabeth accepted it, ordered court mourning, and recalled Dudley to her side. But the damage was done. The scandal clung to him. Marrying him now, Weir argues, became impossible for Elizabeth. It would confirm the darkest suspicions, risk her throne, and irrevocably tarnish her image. Dudley remained her closest companion, her eyes. But the dream of marriage, if he ever truly entertained it, was over. He would remain at her side, powerful, favored, but never her husband. Their relationship settled into something complex, deep affection, mutual reliance, but also frustration and occasional conflict. While Elizabeth navigated the treacherous currents of courtship and Dudley's scandal, another storm was brewing to the north. Her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, had returned to her kingdom in 1561 after the death of her young husband, the King of France. Mary was everything. Elizabeth was not: impulsive, romantic, overtly Catholic, and arguably possessed of a stronger blood claim to the English throne in the eyes of many Catholics. From the moment Mary landed in Scotland, the two queens were locked in a complex dance of rivalry, suspicion, and reluctant kinship. Mary's primary goal was to be named Elizabeth's successor. Elizabeth consistently refused, fearing that naming an heir would make her own position vulnerable. "Princes cannot like their children, those that should succeed unto them," she once remarked, remembering her own precarious youth. She played for time, offering friendship, suggesting meetings that never quite happened, while watching Mary's choices with mounting anxiety. And Mary's choices proved disastrous. Ignoring advice, she fell passionately in love with her tall, handsome, but arrogant and unstable cousin, Lord Darnley. Elizabeth formally disapproved, forbidding the marriage as Darnley was her subject, but Mary defied her, marrying him in 1565. The union quickly soured. Darnley proved cruel, drunken, and demanding. Mary turned for comfort and counsel to her Italian secretary David Rizzio. Jealousy festered. In March 1566, a group of Protestant lords, encouraged by a resentful Darnley, dragged Rizzio from Mary's private supper chamber while she was 6 months pregnant, and brutally murdered him before her eyes. Mary, showing unexpected steel, managed to escape with Darnley, rally support, and regain control. But her relationship with Darnley was irrevocably broken. Then came James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, a bold, ambitious Protestant nobleman who helped her crush the Rizzio conspirators. Mary increasingly relied on him. In February 1567, Darnley himself was murdered. The house he was staying in blown up by gunpowder, his body found strangled in the garden. Suspicion immediately fell on Bothwell and on Mary. Did she know? Was she involved? Elizabeth wrote to her cousin in horror, begging her to pursue the murderers relentlessly to preserve her honor, but Mary seemed paralyzed, or perhaps complicit. Bothwell underwent a sham trial and was acquitted. Then, just weeks later, he abducted Mary, perhaps with her consent, ravished her, divorced his own wife, and married the Queen. The scandal was immense. Europe was horrified. Elizabeth wrote condemning Mary's choice, calling it perilous and dishonorable. The Scottish lords, already hostile to Bothwell, rose in rebellion. Within a month of the wedding, Mary was forced to surrender at Carberry Hill, while Bothwell fled into exile. The people of Edinburgh reviled her as an adulteress and murderer. She was imprisoned in Lochleven Castle, miscarried twins, and in July 1567 was forced to abdicate in favor of her infant son, James VI. Elizabeth was outraged, not necessarily out of sympathy for Mary the woman, whose recent actions she detested, but out of principle. Subjects deposing an anointed queen? It set a terrifying precedent. She demanded Mary's restoration, threatened war, refused to recognize the infant James VI, or the Regency government led by Mary's half-brother, Moray. Her own counselors, including Cecil, now Lord Burghley, thought her dangerously misguided, risking an alliance with the Protestant Scottish government for the sake of a disgraced Catholic queen who had consistently plotted against her. In May 1568, Mary escaped Lochleven. Rallying supporters, she faced Moray's forces at Langside, was decisively defeated, and fled south, crossing the border into England and throwing herself upon Elizabeth's mercy. What was Elizabeth to do? Mary's arrival presented an excruciating dilemma. Send her back to Scotland, likely to her death, let her go to France or Spain. She'd become a pawn for England's enemies. Keep her in England? she'd inevitably become a magnet for Catholic plots and conspiracies. Elizabeth chose the latter course, but with conditions. Mary would be treated as a royal guest, but kept in honorable custody under strict surveillance. And she could not be received at court, Elizabeth insisted, until she had cleared her name of involvement in Darnley's murder. Mary wept and protested, claiming innocence, demanding to confront her accusers, but Elizabeth refused a face-to-face meeting. Instead, she convened a complex inquiry, ostensibly to investigate the Scottish lords' conduct, but inevitably focusing on Mary's guilt. It was during this inquiry, held first at York and then Westminster, that Moray produced the infamous casket letters, intimate letters and sonnets, allegedly written by Mary to Bothwell, seemingly proving her complicity in Darnley's murder. Were they genuine, forged, tampered with? Mary furiously denied them but was never allowed to see them. Elizabeth's commissioners, including Norfolk, who saw the originals, were appalled and largely convinced of their authenticity. The inquiry ended ambiguously in January 1569. Nothing was officially proven against Mary, but her reputation was destroyed. Elizabeth dared not declare her innocent, nor did she want her formally condemned. Mary remained in England, moved from castle to castle under the watchful eye of custodians like the Earl of Shrewsbury, a prisoner in a gilded cage for the next 19 years. And just as Elizabeth had feared, Mary became the focus of plot after Catholic plot. The Northern Rising of 1569 aimed to free her and restore Catholicism. The Ridolfi plot of 1571 involved a planned Spanish invasion led by the Duke of Alva, Elizabeth's assassination, and Mary's marriage to the Duke of Norfolk. This plot led to Norfolk's execution. Elizabeth agonized for months before signing the warrant, the first and last English duke to be executed for treason during her reign. It also hardened attitudes against Mary. Parliament demanded her execution, but Elizabeth refused. Then came the papal bull of 1570, excommunicating Elizabeth, declaring her deposed, and absolving her Catholic subjects from their allegiance. This was a disaster for English Catholics, forcing them to choose between their faith and their queen, effectively turning religious dissent into potential treason. It fueled Protestant patriotism but also intensified the danger around Elizabeth. Jesuit missionary priests began arriving from Europe, dedicated to restoring Catholicism, some through spiritual work, others through political intrigue. Walsingham, Elizabeth's staunchly Protestant Secretary of State from 1573, built up a formidable spy network to counter the threat. Through all this, Elizabeth walked a tightrope. She dealt firmly with threats. Harsher laws against Catholics were passed, conspirators executed, but she resisted the bloodthirsty demands for Mary's head. She continued her diplomatic dance, playing France against Spain. The proposed marriage to Catherine de' Medici's youngest son, the Duke of Alençon, formerly Anjou, known affectionately as her Frog, dominated the late 1570s and early 1580s. This was perhaps her most intense courtship. Alençon, despite being 20 years younger and pockmarked, visited England twice. There were passionate letters, exchanges of rings, even a public kiss, an announcement of betrothal. Was she serious this time? Her counselors were divided. Public opinion, especially Puritan, was hostile to a French Catholic match. The age gap and the political complexities proved too much. Elizabeth, likely using the opposition as a convenient excuse, finally let the proposal die, telling her courtiers, sadly, she was now an old woman, to whom paternosters will suffice in place of nuptials. Meanwhile, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, had finally accepted Elizabeth would never marry him. He secretly married Mary's former rival, the widowed Lettice Knollys, Countess of Essex, in 1578. When Elizabeth found out, possibly through the French envoy Simier during the Alençon courtship, her fury was volcanic. Lettice was banished from court forever. Leicester suffered temporary disgrace, but was eventually forgiven. Their relationship endured, settling into a deep, if sometimes stormy, friendship until his death in 1588. Elizabeth was genuinely heartbroken. keeping his last letter in a casket by her bed until her own death. The final act in the tragedy of Mary, Queen of Scots, came with the Babington plot in 1586. Walsingham, through brilliant counter-espionage involving intercepted letters smuggled in beer barrels, trapped Mary into explicitly approving a plot by Anthony Babington and his friends to assassinate Elizabeth and facilitate a Spanish invasion. The evidence was incontrovertible. Now, Elizabeth had no choice. Mary was tried by a commission of peers at Fotheringhay Castle. She defended herself eloquently but was found guilty. Parliament clamored for execution. Elizabeth prevaricated, tormented by the implications of executing an anointed queen, her own cousin. She hinted darkly that Mary's custodian, Sir Amyas Paulet, might quietly dispose of her, saving Elizabeth the responsibility. Paulet indignantly refused to commit murder. Finally, driven by fear for her own life and intense pressure from her council, Elizabeth signed the death warrant in February 1587, then furiously blamed her secretary, William Davison, for dispatching it without her final explicit command, ruining his career to preserve her own image. On February 8, 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, dressed defiantly in Catholic scarlet beneath her black gown, was beheaded in the Great Hall at Fotheringhay. Elizabeth publicly displayed grief and anger, but the removal of her rival brought a measure of security she hadn't known for decades. The execution, however, finally spurred Philip of Spain to launch his long-planned enterprise of England. In the summer of 1588, the Invincible Armada sailed. England held its breath. Elizabeth rose magnificently to the occasion. Her navy, smaller and more agile, brilliantly led by Howard and Drake, harried the Spanish galleons up the Channel. Fireships off Calais broke the Spanish formation. A decisive battle off Gravelines, followed by terrible storms, the Protestant wind, scattered and wrecked the Armada. While the fleet fought at sea, Elizabeth went to Tilbury, where Leicester had assembled troops to repel Parma's expected landing from the Netherlands. Riding amongst her soldiers clad in a silver breastplate, she delivered perhaps the most famous speech of her life. "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too, and think foul scorn that Parma or Spain, or any prince of Europe should dare invade the borders of my realm." It was her finest hour. England had faced down the mightiest power in Europe, and survived. National confidence soared. The years following the Armada saw Elizabeth consolidate her legend as Gloriana, the Virgin Queen who had saved her people. But they were also years of increasing challenges. The long war with Spain dragged on, draining the treasury. Ireland remained a costly, bloody quagmire. Bad harvests brought famine and discontent. A new generation rose at court, less deferential, more impatient. Leicester's death left a void. His stepson, the young, dashing, ambitious Earl of Essex, quickly became the aging Queen's favorite. Their relationship was passionate, volatile, almost maternal on her side, petulant and demanding on his. Essex craved military glory, but proved fatally incompetent during his disastrous command in Ireland in 1599. Returning against orders, bursting into the Queen's bedchamber before she was wigged and painted, he committed an unforgivable offense. Stripped of offices and favor, his income cut off, facing ruin, Essex tragically lost his grip on reality. In February 1601, believing his enemies, Cecil and Raleigh, had poisoned the Queen's mind against him, he staged a desperate, doomed rebellion in the streets of London, hoping the citizens would rise with him. They did not. He was quickly arrested, tried, and condemned for treason. Elizabeth, though saddened, signed his death warrant without her previous hesitation. Essex was beheaded privately within the Tower. The last years were lonely. Her trusted old guard, Burghley, Walsingham, Leicester, Hatton, were gone. She relied increasingly on Burghley's shrewd, hard-working son, Robert Cecil. She still performed her duties, still commanded respect, still flashed her old fire. But the spark was dimming. She grew weary, melancholic, haunted perhaps by ghosts of the past. In the cold spring of 1603, at Richmond Palace, she fell ill. A throat infection, fever, compounded by a deep depression, a loss of the will to live. She refused food, refused medicine, refused even to go to bed, lying for days on cushions on the floor, her finger in her mouth, staring silently. When finally persuaded to her bed, she knew the end was near. Asked to name her successor, she was speechless, but reportedly made the sign of a crown over her head, taken to mean James of Scotland. In the early hours of March 24, 1603, with Archbishop Whitgift praying beside her, Elizabeth I died peacefully, aged 69. The Elizabethan age was over. What a life, what a journey! From a princess whose legitimacy was questioned, whose life was constantly in peril, to a queen who ruled for 45 years, defeated the Armada, and left England stronger, more confident, and more unified than she found it. Alison Weir's book takes us deep into the heart of that journey, showing us the immense pressures, the impossible choices, the personal sacrifices Elizabeth made. What strikes me most, looking back on her story, is her incredible resilience. Think of the blows she endured. Her mother's execution, imprisonment, betrayals, plots, the constant pressure to marry and surrender her autonomy. Yet she never broke. She learned, she adapted, she mastered the art of survival, and then the art of rule. She used her intelligence, her education, her charm, even her perceived weaknesses, to navigate a world dominated by powerful, often ruthless men. Her decision not to marry, which seemed so baffling and frustrating to her contemporaries, looks in hindsight like a masterstroke, whether born of personal trauma or political calculation, or likely a mix of both. By remaining single, she kept England free from foreign entanglements, avoided internal divisions, and maintained absolute control over her own destiny and her kingdoms. She truly became wedded to her people, transforming her status as the Virgin Queen from a potential liability into a powerful symbol of national devotion and divine favor. And her connection with her people, that was real. Her progresses, her speeches, her willingness to engage with even the humblest subjects. She understood, perhaps better than any monarch before or since, that her power rested ultimately on their love and loyalty. And she cultivated it brilliantly. Are there lessons for us today? Absolutely. Think about leadership under pressure. Elizabeth faced constant threats, internal and external, yet she rarely panicked. She sought counsel but trusted her own judgment. She understood the power of image, of communication, of connecting with those she led. She showed that strength doesn't always mean aggression. Sometimes it means patience, strategic delay, knowing when not to act. Her life also speaks volumes about balancing personal feelings with public duty. She clearly loved Robert Dudley deeply, yet she sacrificed the possibility of personal happiness with him for the sake of her crown and her kingdom's stability. She faced agonizing choices, like the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, that clearly caused her immense personal pain, but which she ultimately saw as necessary for the safety of her realm. Perhaps the simplest takeaway is about resilience. Life throws challenges at all of us. Elizabeth's story reminds us that even in the darkest times, with the odds stacked against you, it's possible not just to endure, but to prevail through intelligence, courage, and an unwavering sense of purpose. If you find yourself facing a difficult choice or feeling overwhelmed by responsibility, perhaps think of Elizabeth. How did she navigate her labyrinth? How did she keep her head when all around her seemed to be losing theirs? History isn't just about the past. It's a wellspring of wisdom for the present. Take a moment this week just to reflect on one challenge you're facing and ask yourself, what would Elizabeth do? Not literally, perhaps, but what quality, her patience, her courage, her strategic thinking, might help you find your way through? That was a glimpse into the life of Elizabeth I, by Alison Weir. We've journeyed through the main paths of her incredible reign today, touching on the key moments and relationships that shaped her. But honestly, a summary like this is just scratching the surface. The real richness, the intricate detail, the feeling of truly understanding the woman behind the legend that comes from immersing yourself in the full story. Alison Weir brings Elizabeth and her world to life with such vividness. If any part of this story, her struggles, her triumphs, her complex heart, has captured your imagination, I wholeheartedly encourage you to pick up a copy of the book. Reading it isn't just learning history. It's stepping into another time, walking alongside one of history's most fascinating figures, and perhaps learning something profound about leadership, resilience, and the human spirit along the way. You can find a link to the book in the description below. And if you found this journey valuable today, if it sparked your curiosity or gave you something to think about, please do take a moment to click that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another remarkable book that has shaped leaders and thinkers. Let's continue discovering these powerful ideas together. Until next time, take care.